Well, we're in a series on King David, looking at the stories about David, learning what lessons we can from his life and from his actions. Now, before I begin today's message, let's first play a game. You ever played the game, Name That Tune? Somebody gives you just a little brief clue, and you got to figure out the song title. All right, I'm going to give you two words. Two words. Let's see how many of you know the song. You ready? Splish, splash. I was taking a bath long about a Saturday night, rub-a-dubbing in the tub. Yeah, everything's all right. Hey, I'm surprised. That's an old song, Bobby Darin. A lot of you know it. You know, if I had started today just by giving you that as the clue to the sermon, I expect many of you could have guessed who we're going to talk about today in the life of King David. It's going to be about David and Bathsheba. Bathsheba is famous for the bathtub. She was the original bathing beauty. And we're going to talk about Bathsheba and about David as we look at 2 Samuel chapter 11 and tell the story and learn some good lessons. Now first, a word about Bathsheba. The bio is really slim. Samuel doesn't tell us very much at all about this lady. Here's what we do know. We know the name of her father, Eliam. We know her husband, Uriah the Hittite. Now beyond that, we're not going to get much more. Except one other note that we're given. And that is it says, and she was very beautiful. Now, you know, all through the Old Testament, you're going to run into hundreds of names, men and women. You usually get some brief description, then the text moves on. But you'll go a long ways before it ever stops on a man like it did with young David. And the text says, and he was handsome. Oh, yeah. David was a good-looking guy. And then you'll go a long ways before you'll run into a woman like Bathsheba. And the writer will stop and say, and she was very beautiful. Well, we know that about Bathsheba. She was a good-looking lady. Now, the story of David and Bathsheba is a story that gives us an opportunity to learn a lesson about foolish behavior. You know, I'm all about King David. He's one of the great heroes of the Old Testament, one of the saints. And if you think about it, he really deserves all the billing that he gets. He was a great king, a political leader as well as a military leader. He's a spiritual leader as well. David wrote Psalms. Most of the Psalms in the book of Psalms came from David. We use them for worship and praise. They also provide spiritual guidance for how to live your life in a way that's pleasing to God. I mean, David, that's about as good as it gets. God himself said, that's a man after my own heart. But you know what? David wasn't perfect. I don't know that anyone is really. All of us doing the best we can, looking pretty good and living pretty good. Still, anybody can make foolish mistakes if they let their guard down. And 2 Samuel chapter 11 is about an occasion where David let his guard down. And it wasn't just one mistake. It was a series of mistakes. All along the way, he should have been aware of what was happening and said, I got to stop this before it gets out of hand. But he didn't. And at some point, it did get out of hand. Ended badly. That's why I want to tell you the story of David and Bathsheba and see if all of us in this room can learn the lessons we need to learn. Let me tell you his mistakes. Here's number one. Number one, idle hands. Idle hands. David wasn't doing what needed to be done. You know, many of you in this room, you still remember Elvis, the king? Now, if you know anything about Elvis, especially if you saw him live in concert or been to Graceland and done the tour, you'll know that with Elvis, ever so often you could look and you'll see the letters TCB. Might be on the drums. Or it was on the side of the jet there in the hangar at Graceland if you take the tour, and other places, TCB. Now, who in the room remembers what TCB stands for? I hear it. Taking care of business. Oh, that was his little slogan. Taking care of business. Now, that's a good slogan for a hard-working man. Someone who's got a lot of stuff to get done, so let's get busy, let's get to it. Taking care of business. Let me tell you, in 2 Samuel chapter 11, David is not taking care of business. Oh, it's the opposite. We start at the very first of the chapter, verse 1. Here's what verse 1 says. It was springtime. It was spring when kings go off to battle. And David sent Joab and his army off into battle. Now, first, it's springtime, the time for war. You know, back in those days, they didn't care much for winter activities any more than we do. It's not a good time to be out in the fields doing something, especially trying to fight a war. For them, the wintertime was a wet season, rainy season. And then as it started to warm up, it also got dry. If you got to get on a battlefield, you want to wait till the spring comes. And so every spring was time to get out there. Reminds me of our tradition today, spring training. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know if you even care about spring training, but I spent so many years in Cincinnati rooting for the Cincinnati Reds. Spring training is a big deal. I'll tell you why. We'll go through the season. We get down to July, our team always stinks. We're so bad at that point that you can already tell we can't even come close to winning. The question is, are we going to be last place? And so they start announcing it in the paper, on the radio, how many days till spring training. And so I can tell you it's 8 more days, and spring training begins. You see, springtime is the time to get the bat and the glove and the ball and get out there and play baseball. Same for Kings. Spring was the time to settle issues. Now, the issues would be all those other nations on your border, because what they tended to do in those days was send a troop of men across the border, raid the villages, plunder, steal, kill, slip back across the border. When spring came, that was the time to take on whoever did that last and push them back. Push them back so they leave you alone for a while. And so it was springtime, the time when kings go off to battle. But David didn't go on this particular year. He sent Joab and the army, and he stayed home. This particular spring, David's in a little bit of a funk. A malaise has set in, and he just doesn't feel like doing it. So in other words, he's not taking care of business like he should. He's playing hooky. He is shirking his responsibilities. Now, that's not good. That's not good at all. Now, what David is going to do as he stays back, David's going to miss out on all the victories that God will give the army of Israel. David won't be part of that at all. The next verse says, so Joab took the army, and they went out after the Ammonites. They're the ones giving them trouble. It says they destroyed the sons of Ammon. And they took a key city, and they surrounded that city, besieged it. It should be falling any day now. And that victory, great victory for Israel, David won't be part of it, because he didn't feel like it. He stayed back home. David's going to be back home in Jerusalem. He'll be enjoying a lot of good food, a lot of wine, a lot of rest in his own bed, something his men won't have as they're out there, well, taking care of business. Many of you know the name Homer, and by that I'm not referring to the Homer in The Simpsons. I'm going back a lot earlier to the writer of ancient Greece. He wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Homer loved to tell stories of great military heroes. Now, in those stories, he also gives critique. And he'll talk about military officers. Here's what Homer said. A military officer ought to be focused on the job at hand, because after all, he's got the lives of his men that are his responsibility. The nation is in the balance. He needs to have his full attention on the job at hand. And so it is, Homer would say such things as, a king doesn't have the luxury of sleeping all night. Oh, he's got to put in a good hard day's work. He sleeps, and then he gets up early and gets right to work. A military leader can't take naps during the day. He's got too much important things he needs to take care of. He's got to stay focused on his job. Now, that would describe David at other times, but not in chapter 11. David's not feeling like doing what he ought to do. And so as David pulls back on this occasion, he's already setting himself up for trouble, because you're going to have the problem of the idle hands. You know the old expression, idle hands are the devil's workshop. When you don't have something good to engage yourself with, I've got plenty of time and nothing to do, that could be a recipe for getting yourself in trouble. Now, don't get me wrong. I do believe that between all the good work that we do, there also be good times of rest. Work and rest, work and rest. We need that. But listen, even in rest, as well as in work, we want to make sure that we are engaging ourselves in good things. Things that are edifying, things that are constructive, things that are beneficial, things that we can look back at the end of the day and say it was a good day. Now think about it. When you and I aren't at our jobs, when we're taking rest time, how do we oftentimes do it? Well, we might, for example, spend time with family, with a spouse, with kids, with grandkids. Boy, that's a good investment in them. It's good for us as well. That's productive. Or sometimes we're actually doing our chores, our list of things to do. It's still a kind of work, but it's a different kind of work, and it's a work getting things done around the house, and when we get done, we say, good, because you never run out of things to do, and it's nice to get some things checked off the list. My point is, when you've got purpose in what you do throughout the day, whether it's work or rest, that's a good day. When you don't know what to do, you don't feel like doing what you need to do, idle hands can get you in all sorts of trouble. And that was David's first mistake. I'll tell you David's second mistake, impure thoughts. Impure thoughts. Here's how the story lays out for you. It says, when evening rolled around, David took a walk on the roof of the palace, and as he did so, he looked over there and he saw a woman taking a bath. Now first, when it says evening, you might read that and assume it's sometime during the night, and he's restless, he can't sleep. But what's more likely as you read that word in the Hebrew is it's as evening is approaching. They would use that expression referred to what you and I call late afternoon. See, David was taking a nap. And as he gets up from that afternoon nap and he's up walking on the roof, because they had those flat roofs where they could go up there, they could sit and rest, they could go up there and eat, they could walk around and cool off, and as evening is approaching, he's walking around. He's in the palace, so he's higher than all the other houses. And as he's looking out along the way, he spots a woman taking a bath. Now, probably in a courtyard somewhere, which has normal protections down low, but he's up on the palace roof, and he spots the woman taking the bath. Now, a gentleman would have turned aside. David watches the show. A person who's working on a pure heart would say, this is not good, this is not right, and would turn aside. But David watches. And in doing so, David's going to break number 10 of the 10 Commandments. Do not covet your neighbor's wife. You look at the 10 Commandments, Moses takes all the rules and pulls out 10 to represent all the rest, and you wonder, how'd that one make the list? Don't covet your neighbor's wife. It's so specific. David's a good example of why, and he's not the only guy. Looking at someone who, well, that belongs to someone else. There's a different marriage there, and you're looking and thinking and lusting. And so it is that David is getting himself in trouble as his eyes are lusting for someone else. Now, you know, that's an issue that's still prevalent today. I mean, back then, David's wrestling with it. Others did as well, but today it's still a problem. You think about how easy it is to have impure thoughts about someone else. We live in a culture with a media that throws images at us all the time. They're advertising a product, but they have to dress it up with something sexual and suggestive. Movies and television shows have to always break for some kind of sex scene that you could say, you really could have told the story without it, but no, they wanted to tell the story with it. And from what I hear tell, you can't even watch a Super Bowl game without a little bit of suggestive thrown at you, right? Yeah, you see, our media throws it at us. It's no wonder that people wrestle with impure thoughts, that sexual lust arises in the heart. Now, it may be that there's not much you and I can do to stop it from coming our way, but I'm always reminded of the words of Martin Luther, the reformer, the preacher. Luther talked about lustful thoughts, and he likened it to a bird. He says, you know, I can't prevent a bird from landing on my head. They just do. But I don't have to allow it to build a nest there. When the bird lands, you're supposed to shoo it off, say, get away. David should have shooed it off. He should have said, I don't need to be looking over that direction, but he did. And he looked, and he lusted. He'd have done well to listen to the wisdom of a Job. Job 31, verse 1, Job says, I have made a covenant with my eyes as a covenant of purity. I made a covenant with my eyes. How can I then stare at a virgin, a young lady? You say, I don't do that kind of thing because I covenanted, I promised. I'm going to keep my eyes pure. David would have done well to think about that. Now, that lust that was developing in his heart, it led to a curiosity. It says in the text, he sent someone to go find out whose house is that? And who's the lady of the house? Now, honestly, in this story, he doesn't need to know her name. Truth is, he should have stopped right there and said, I looked way too long. I know this is wrong. That's not what I should do. He should have stopped it right there. But no, he was curious. I just like to know who she is. I want to know something about her. And that, once again, was a dangerous step in a wrong direction. That's what David's up to. You know, after I preached first service, my wife told me something. She says, so you can use this expression. I said, what's that? She says, when someone is looking, they can say, well, even I may be on a diet, but doesn't mean I can't look at the menu. Now, I first wondered, where'd she hear that? Yeah, I don't know where she got that from, but I will tell you, there could be some trouble at looking too long at that menu, right? That's what David's doing. David is looking and contemplating, and next thing you know, I want to know more about her. Oh, David's getting himself in trouble. He's coveting his neighbor's wife. You know, David would have done well just to listen to his own advice. He wrote Psalm 24. In Psalm 24, he asked the question, who will you permit to come and ascend into your presence, O Lord? Who will you allow to come upon your holy hill? And then the answer, those who have clean hands, those who have a pure heart. See, David knows the right thing to do. Today, he's not doing what's right. And you know what got it all started off wrong? He wasn't taking care of business and doing what he should have been doing. Engaged where he should have been engaged. And now one thing is leading to another. Now those impure thoughts led to an indecent proposal. It says in the text that what David did next was he sent someone over to her house and summoned her into the palace. Now at this point, I'm not quite sure exactly how that message was conveyed. It could have been he dressed it up this way, that the king is offering an opportunity like he likes to do ever so often for loyal subjects to have an opportunity to come into his house, meet the king firsthand. And so you're getting that opportunity. Could have made it sound like a royal thing. May have made it sound a little bit more suggestive. The king has noticed you. We know that your husband's out of town, thought you might enjoy an evening of dinner with him. Maybe you just simply ordered it. You've been summoned, and of course if the king summons you, you go. I'm not sure how it's presented to Bathsheba. But you know, if the king says go, you go, and she came to the house. And already David's making another mistake. At this point, you've got inappropriate conduct. Inappropriate contact. He is now getting a step closer to doing what he tells himself I'm not going to do, but he's getting ready. His mind is scheming. Now, you know, that's what often happens today when you and I hear the stories of, say, an office romance. Two people that they work together, and at some point that leads to something else. Or among family and friends where we're just being friendly, but just friendly turns into something more, something inappropriate. You know how it begins? It begins real simple. It looks innocent enough. It begins with such things as, well, just little glances and get caught glancing. Or with sitting down next to each other. I didn't realize you were sitting here. Yeah, you did. You rushed for the seat. Or messages, a little bit of teasing. At some point, just a simple touch. It's not much, but it's enough to excite. You see, David is doing inappropriate contact when he just simply brings her into the house and puts her in his presence. He's just asking for trouble. We do too if we don't watch out. Of course, one thing does, in fact, lead to another. And lo and behold, David is going to break number 7 of the 10 Commandments. Do not commit adultery. That's not his wife. She's not her husband. And they will both sin against God in what comes next. Now, I always wonder about Bathsheba because we're seeing it really from David's side as the story is told. I wonder about Bathsheba. Now, when this happened, was this coercion? Could be. After all, he's the king. There's a power there. He's a male whose presence can be intimidating in situations like this. It could be that she's a victim of someone abusing his position. You know, that's the rage today, the Me Too movement, where women talk about how they've felt victimized by men who take advantage of them in the situation they're in. Listen, I will tell you, ladies, that's a wrong thing. Men, that's a wrong thing to do. If David did that, that's a shame. A good man to make a mistake like that, he shouldn't. Now, on the other hand, it could have been consensual. It could have been her husband's been gone to war a little bit too long, and she thinks this could be a fun thing to have dinner with the king, and who knows. And so it may be that this is one of those things that if something develops, that's all right, it's just a one-time thing. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of thing, you know. And so maybe she came on her own. It'd still be wrong. You see, whether this is something he forced, whether this is something she chose, it's still adultery. and still wrong in the sight of God. Good for us to keep in mind as well. You know, if Hollywood told that story, by the time they get done setting it up, you're almost cheering for this couple that's finding true love and happiness. And no, it's wrong. And so it is that David has once again allowed himself to move in a direction of making foolish choices, and along the way, he's continuing to be wrong in the sight of God. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. It should, but it doesn't, because there's one more thing that David does. It's the sin of innocent blood. I say innocent blood because the story could have ended right there. The two of them could have had that one-night affair. It was over. They got to deal with the guilt, but basically stay away from each other and never happen again. Could have, it didn't, because she becomes pregnant. And that's the surprise that adds more intrigue to the story. She sends a message to the king. I'm pregnant. I have a baby coming. It's your baby. And now David, in a panic, has to figure out, how do I hide this thing? How do I make it appear that this is Uriah's baby and not mine? Uriah's off at war. I got to do something. And that's when he begins his conspiring against Uriah. An innocent man who's done nothing wrong in this story, and David conspires against him. Now, the first plan he comes up with, he says, this will take care of it. He sends a message to Joab, the general, says, send Uriah back from the battlefield. I want a full report of what's happening. Now, folks, if he'd been out there doing what he should be doing, he wouldn't need a report. He'd be there. Well, he wasn't. So send him back for a report. Uriah shows up. He gives the king a full report of all that's going on, like a good soldier would. David says, well done. Well done to the army. Well done to you. He says, now, before you go back, take you 2 or 3 days. Go home, rest. You deserve it. Then go on back and take your position. Dismiss. And as he's dismissed, Uriah won't go home. No, that'd be wrong. He goes down to the quarters where the army stays. When David hears about it next day, he calls him in and says, hey, I gave you a break. What's wrong? He says, I couldn't do that. He says, my commander and all of the men that I serve with, they're out in the field, out in the field taking care of business. And it'd be wrong for me to go home and enjoy the luxuries of home until we get our job done. Now, that's a good soldier. That's a man of honor and integrity. This is a man David ought to be. But on this particular occasion, he's not. And so it is, he refuses to go home until the job is done. So much for plan A. David switches to plan B. Plan B, he says, okay, fine. I'll send you out to the battlefield tomorrow. To this evening, unless you and I will have dinner in the palace, and then I'll send you tomorrow. So he shows up for dinner. David's scheme, going to get him drunk. They're going to sit around. They're going to keep filling up the wine cups and going to tell old war stories and have a good time and get him so drunk. Well, David knows what happens when somebody is excessive with alcohol. It's going to cloud his judgment. It's going to lower his inhibitions. They'll get him so drunk that then they'll just help him out the door, help him to his house. And once they get him in the door, even if he just falls down, collapses, and sleeps the rest of the night, he'll wake up the next day. And later when his wife tells him she's pregnant, he'll assume it was that night. He just doesn't remember it. Great scheme, he thinks. Except when Uriah finishes and he stumbles out of the room, he goes down to the servants' quarter and he sleeps it off there. Next day, he's ready to go back to duty. You see, this man has too much integrity to go back home and do what he just believes would be wrong in my situation. I need to be with the men doing what needs to be done. David's down to plan C. Plan C, though, it really gets bad. Plan C is he hands Uriah a sealed message, says deliver that to the general, to Joab. Now, he's such a man of integrity, he's not going to peek and see what it says. He's going to hand it over. It says, I need to get rid of this guy. So, take that city that you've gone up against, that you've laid siege to. Find the gate that has the strongest fortified, got the most defense. I want you to take a small team of men, led by Uriah. I want them to charge that gate because I want him to die in the process. So, they pick the gate, send the team. I'm sure he did it with a great speech, something along the lines of, let's do this for God and country, for David, for Israel, for our Lord, and got those guys wound up ready to bust through those gates. Of course they didn't, and they died, and the message came back to Jerusalem that we took some casualties today, and their leader, Uriah the Hittite, was killed in battle. David knows exactly what to do now. The mourning period begins for a fallen soldier. Oh, David knows how to get up and give the right kind of speeches, commend these men and the fallen. He can go through the mourning period just fine. When it's over, Leaves behind a widow, no husband to take care of her. David can tell all his friends, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to go and take care of her. So he brings her in the household, puts his name on her. She becomes one of his wives. Child is born, another son for David. And in his mind, this thing is finally over. I mean, he had to work hard to conspire a way to hide his wrong, but he's got it, except he doesn't. You know, the last verse lets you know there's something more going on here, because the last verse says, and the Lord was very angry with David. Why? Not only for everything he did, but there's one more commandment he broke. Commandment number 6, do not commit murder. And David did the unthinkable. In this room, can any of you imagine actually going that far? And yet David did, with a series of bad mistakes that just led him further and further down the line. Well, that's what happened to David. Now, I'll tell you how this story is going to end. It's not good. The prophet Nathan, the preacher, he'll show up and he says, God knows what you did. Now you got to pay. He put a curse on the house of David. The curse was because you took an innocent man, you killed him with a sword. Now, David could say, well, actually, I didn't personally kill him. No. You ordered the death. You killed him with the sword, and you stole his wife. Here's the curse upon your house. You're going to have to watch while some of your own family members are violently killed with a sword. He will live to see 2 of his sons who were taken down in a violent way by the sword. He'll have to grieve over them. And because you stole his wife, the day will come when the women of your household will be taken from you and assaulted in public view. You did it in private. It'll be done in public. And he will live through a rebellion where he has to quickly flee, but the women he left behind are taken by the rebels. And the man in charge will take them and one by one assault them in public as a way of showing offense to David. See, a curse came on the house of David because of what he did to this innocent man. Not only that, the child that was born, that son that you've got, he's going to get sick and die. Now, you know what a man like David's going to do? Because David really is a good man, just made some bad mistakes. David repented. Right there on the spot, he repented, he confessed his sin, and he confessed it publicly. He wrote Psalm 51. Psalm 51 was written about the sin of Bathsheba. He told everybody what he did and how wrong he was as he sinned against God and then tried to hide it, and he was wrong. David was a repentant heart, genuine repentance. And the text says he was forgiven. But I'll tell you this, though, the consequences of his actions still fell on him. You need to remember that. You do something, it doesn't matter what it is, you can be forgiven. God's grace is huge. You can be forgiven about anything. But just because you're forgiven doesn't mean you're off the hook. The consequences of wrong actions still fall just the same. And thus, David had the members of his family violently killed. He had the wives that were assaulted. He had a child who got sick. And he prayed 24/7. He's got sackcloth and ashes. He's pleading with the Lord. He says, Lord, please spare the child. Show mercy to him. Take me. Kill me. Now, David's a warrior. Oh, he could stand something like that. Best way for a man like David to suffer is not to attack him, but go after his family, the people he cares about, and let him watch helplessly as they suffer and die. That's how God punished David time and time again. And the child eventually died. There's got to be a good lesson here for us, right? A lesson about the consequences of wrong and how it spirals out of control. Think about David, what happened? Lust, adultery, conspiracy, murder. Oh, I don't know how far down the road you and I would go. At some point, maybe we'd come to our senses and stop in our tracks, but it should have stopped on day one. Because on day one, when David didn't feel like going out and doing what needed to be done, shirking his responsibilities, he should have been out there in the field with his men taking care of business, and he wasn't. But even along the way, there were times he should have stopped and said, this is wrong. I can't go any further. But he went so far, it was too deep in, and then he had to pay the price. That's the lesson from King David and Bathsheba. It is a lesson on foolish behavior. Because any one of us, as good as we are, can still make some bad decisions, do some stupid things. And you never know where they'll go, how far they'll get out of control. And that's why we've got to be vigilant. We've got to have our defenses up at all time. We've got an evil tempter out there. He'll do his best to lull you in. We've got weaknesses within that we know we struggle with, and they'll lead us astray if we're not careful. And that's why the lesson to be learned is this. You got to always be alert. Always doing what you need to be doing. Staying on that narrow path. Living the life that you pledged to live. And that, folks, is the lesson we learn from the story of David and Bathsheba.